to Lear. Look what Lear is doing. What's Lear doing? He's glaring. What's he glaring at? Well, what he sees, but does Edgar see it? You're going to have eyeballs at your trial, and I don't see any. Right? Come on over here, Bork. No, she can't come. Bessie can't come because there's nobody there. The foul fiend honks poor Tom, and the voice of a nightingale hop a dance cries in Tom's belly for 2 white herring. Crow-cut, black angel, I have no food for thee. How do you, sir? Stand, you're not so amazed. Will you lie down and rest upon the cushions? I'll see their trial first. Bring in the evidence. Thou, robed man of justice, take thy place. And thou, fool, his yoke fellow of equity. And thou, his yoke, he puts them up so they're out. Now they're sitting again. Bench by his side. You are all a commission. You sit too. Let us deal justly, sleepless or awake, as Charlie Shepherd. Her the cat. Arraign her first. 'Tis God rule. I here take my oath before this honorable assembly. King, the poor king, her father. Come, mistress. Is your name Goneril? She cannot deny it. Cry of mercy, I have to keep on the stool. What was she? She's a stool, milking stool, right? I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were the princess of the realm. I thought you were a milking stool. And here's another whose wan looks proclaim what store her heart is laid on. Stop her there! Wonderful moment of stage managing in the Lear, Olivier. What is Goneril? What is Regan? Remember when he says, stop her there? And here's another one. Yeah, what is she in the film? You ever see it? Chicken, remember? He reaches down for Regan, and it's a chicken who flies away. So when he says, stop her there, there's the chicken flying off. Nothing in the text, but a great moment of genius is something there. Stop her there. Arm, sword, fire, corruption in the place. And he turns to the judge. False justice, sir. Why hast thou let her escape? Trust thy lying wits. What is Edgar doing? He cannot maintain it, you see. And he's in the realm of such true pathos that he can't maintain it. Trust thy... Oh, pity, sir, where is the patience now that you so oft boasted to repay? Edgar turns aside. My tears begin to take his part so much they bar my comforting. Little dog. Tray, Blanche, sweetheart, see? They bark at me. Tom will throw his head back at them. Avaunt, you curs! What is this? Tray, Blanche. What's happening in this? Not the daughters. The little dog. What is this happening to him emotionally? Yes, even the dog. People are faithless, aren't they? Right? But at least my dog is faithful. And in his insanity, this upheaval you see of the world is not even true.
Do you think that trial scene is necessary to this plot?
Yeah, I do. I think it's where we get the depth of his pathos, especially this line, one I just read. I mean, he is perceiving something which he has to perceive. He is absolutely alone. And he has nothing to rely on but himself. Nothing to blame either. You get to it. Yeah, I think it's a very important scene. I don't think it's very often cut from the play, is it? Have you seen it cut? No. It's an extremely powerful scene. In particular, as you see it, it's a much more powerful scene than read, because you have to see Lear visually with these horrible creatures, wretched, making them into judges. And there is, again, on the center of the stage, this is the first act, the first scene, you see, once again, and they are, in fact, giving in. And as you see, Edgar plays the role, doesn't he? I'll bark at them. So he's going to play the madness. So he's getting what he always wanted. He's getting the play he always wanted. They're saying their lines. But it's the wrong play. He thought he was playing Hercules, and he turns out he's playing something else, much less attractive. Let them anatomize Regan. See what reads about her heart. Was there any cause in nature that makes these hard hearts? as you can see. Gloucester says, I've heard there's a plot of death on him. Take care. Okay, Act 3, Scene 7. The word is, the army of France has landed. This is a great scene to do, but we're not even going to touch it. It is a scene where Gloucester's eyes are taken out by Regan and Cornwall. Cornwall is slain by a servant who can't stand it. And there's a lot of, this is a very important scene as well, because it justifies for us the hatred of people for these people, and makes it possible for us to understand Albany's change. He was essentially a good man. Cornwall is horrendously evil man, and Regan's pleasure in the mutilation is awful. But they make a big mistake. What is the mistake? That almost cost them the throne. Anybody know? What's wrong with knocking out Gloucester's eyes? Yes, in their sadistic pleasure, they say, kick him out, let him smell his way to Dover, right? But the fact is, everywhere he goes, what does he do? Yes, he inspires pity and hatred for them, because they're making a public display of their sadistic personalities. Act 4, Scene 1. We'll skip over most of this too. Edgar makes a big mistake and has a couple of nice speeches. Yet better thus, and known to be condemned, than still condemned and flattered. Better to be and know who it is that condemns you than to be flattered by people who condemn you inside their heart. I'd rather be Tom of Bedlam than Edgar, the heir to the Duke of Gloucester. To be worth the lowest and most dejected thing of fortune stands still in esperance. Esperance is the French word for hope, yeah. So even at the very bottom, Shakespeare is bringing to our presence a classic medieval concept, the concept of the Wheel of Fortune, which the medieval people, especially after Boethius, if you know, Consolation of Philosophy, which was a wonderfully appealing philosophy to the Middle Ages and early Renaissance. The Wheel of Fortune is offered as assurance to you that if you are in misery, it has to turn. And if you're at the bottom, you have to get better. And it's a warning to people who are doing well that the wheel comes around. So it's a way the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance reminded itself of the, what do you want to call it, the cycle of life, the permutation of things. And Edgar is touching on this here. The lamentable change is from the best. The worst return to laughter. Welcome then, thou unsubstantial air that I embrace. The wretch that thou hast blown unto the worst owes nothing to thy blasts. But who comes here? My father born in that world. But thy strange mutations make us hate thee. Life would not yield to age. Oh, good my lord, I've been in your family for 40 or 80 years. Good friend, be gone. Thy comforts can do thee no good at all. You cannot see your way. I have no way, therefore want no eyes. I stumbled when I saw. Edgar says, oh gods, who is it can say I am at the worst? I am worse than e'er I was. And worse I may be yet, the worst is not so long as we can say. This is the worst. And he's right, of course. Gloucester gives a comment which is a very famous speech from Lear, and it's one of those I asked you to think about if you were reading the play last week. The statement on the function of the universe, and in his misery he gives a famous line, down to line 31. Is it a beggar man? Madman and beggar too. He has some reason, else he could not beg. In the last night's storm, I such a fellow saw which made me think a man, a worm. My son came then into my mind, and yet my mind was then scarce friends with him. I have heard more since, as flies to wanton boys, are we to the gods, and kill us for our sport. You all heard the lines, I don't think I need to go on. This is his vision, isn't it? Right? What are we? You know, we're like little boys pulling the spiders off the wings of flies, and pulling the legs off ants so we can watch them squirm. It's not you justicers to Gloucester, because he doesn't see any justice here at all, you see. That's what Albany believes. Albany believes in a world of justice, and that the gods are justicers. They're there to see that justice is served. Albany's first response to the news that Cornwall is killed, putting out the eyes of Gloucester, is, proof once again, the gods do rule. Well, it's easier to say that if you're Albany than if you're Gloucester. Receives no connection whatsoever. It's just whim, cruelty to the gods. Okay, Edgar takes him. We're up to Act 2, Scene 4. Albany says, the word is that Albany's not going along with the, did I say Act 2, Scene 4? Act 4, Scene 2. Albany is not going along. Oswald's message is wonderful when you see the shift in it. It's line 3. Where's your master? Madam within, but never a man so changed. I told him of the army that was landed. He smiled at it. I told him you were coming. His answer was, the worse. Albany's made up his mind, hasn't he? The army of France has landed. And your wife is coming. Oh God, that's even worse. So Albany's made up his mind. What most he should dislike seems pleasant to him. What like offensive. Okay, word here comes. I'd love to read it because Goneril and Albany have marvelous interplay here, but we'll just let it go. Cornwall is dead. Act 4, Scene 3, pass over that. We get Cordelia's reaction to Lear's problem. The point is made at the end of Act 4, Scene 4, that France and Cordelia are not here for power, and that brings us up quickly now to Act 4, Scene 6, which is the one I wanted to spend most of today on, and I won't be able to because we only have 15 minutes. But it's a super scene. We'll skip over the first part, except to look at the speech. What has Edgar done with his father? His father says, lead me to the cliff of Dover. You will not need to lead me away. And Edgar knows what's going on, and he has a marvelous trick. He takes him there, but he doesn't take him there. He takes him and stops him on the plain and says, here we are. Act 4, Scene 6. I don't know if I can skip over this. When shall we come to the top of that same hill? We do climb up it now. Look how we labor. He thinks the ground is even. Horrible steep. They're just walking on the plain. But the power of suggestion is taking place, and Shakespeare uses some of his most beautiful poetry to convince us that Gloucester would believe in his blindness. Hark, do you hear the sea? No, truly. Why then your other senses grow imperfect by your eyes' anguish. So may it be indeed. Methinks thy voice is altered, and thou speakest in better phrase and matter than thou didst. You are much deceived, and nothing have I changed but in my garments. Methinks they are better spoken. Come on, sir, here's the place. Stand still. How fearful and dizzy 'tis to cast one's eyes so low. Now watch how carefully this is written. To lead your mind's eye down the cliff, and using descriptions so you can imagine the incredible height the cliffs of Dover have here. The crows and chops that wing the midway air, so scarce, so gross as beetles. So if you imagine how big a crow is, big bird, halfway down, right? They look as big as a beetle, so you get a sense of distance. Halfway down hangs one that gathers samphire, dreadful trade. There's a man whose job is to gather the plant, samphire. He's hanging on the cliff, isn't he? Halfway down, gathering this. And he wouldn't get me doing that for anything. Methinks he seems no bigger than his head. The fishermen that walk upon the beach. Now you're all the way down. Right? Appear like mice. And yon tall anchoring bark diminished to her cock. Right? The whole bark is now as big as the little tiny cockboat. Her cock, a buoy, almost too small for sight. The murmuring surge that on the unnumbered idle pebble chase cannot be heard so high. I'll look no more, as my brain turn, and that efficient sight topple down headlong. Set me where you stand. Give me your hand. You are now within a foot of the extreme verge. For all beneath the moon would I not leap upright. And of course, you know what he does. Falls. And in the play, he walks up immediately and finds his father. My students always, why does he do it? Why didn't he just prevent him? And you have to stop for a minute to think of the wonderful psychology. Edgar's job is not just to stop his father from committing suicide. He can do that easily. Gloucester's blind. But to stop him from desiring to commit suicide. And as he said, I do this to heal him, to cure him. Oh, you mighty gods! And he jumps over. Gone, sir, farewell. And yet I know not how conceit, this is line 42, may rob the treasury of life when life itself yields to the theft. What is that you're saying? It's possible that conceit may rob the treasury of life when life itself yields to the theft. His father has fallen forward, flat on the ground, thinking he's fallen off the cliff. He's lying there inert. And Edgar says, my gosh, maybe he died because he thought it, and he wanted to. You know, it's possible he might have died anyway. Had he been where he thought, by this had thought been passed. Alive or dead? That's where he speaks to him. Right? Like the person walking on the beach. Ho, you sir, friend, hear you sir, speak. Thus might he pass indeed, yet he revived. What are you, sir? Well, let me die. Hast thou been aught but gossamer, feathers, air, so many fathoms down, precipitating, thou shivered like an egg. But thou dost breathe, hast heavy substance, bleed not, speakest, art sound. 10 masts at each make not the altitude which thou hast perpendicularly fell. Now we know roughly. Okay, 10 100-foot masts, 1,000 feet maybe, long ways. Yeah. Happy father, he says, Gloucester says, on line 75, henceforth I'll bear affliction till it do cry out itself, enough, enough, and die. And here's the scene I want to get at, this marvelous scene of Lear's madness and his affection and love toward Gloucester. Lear comes in now, flowers in his hair, weeds, he's been out. Right. He's certainly going to be captured. Who comes here? A safer sense will ne'er accommodate his master thus. No, they cannot touch me for coining, I the king himself. What does it mean they cannot touch me for coining? Yes, what does coining mean? Okay, making counterfeit money. What is the definition of counterfeit money in terms of his being the king? All money in the kingdom is made in his name, that's right, by the king. Every other person in the kingdom can be a counterfeiter. The king cannot. That is, the definition of king means that I can do anything I want if I want to make money. They can't get me for that. Oh, Maurycy, piercing sight. Nature's above art in that respect. There's your press money. That fellow handles his bow like a crow keeper. Draw me a clothier's yard. That's how a bow and arrow, a yard of cloth. You know, you draw cloth. Mouse, beef, this piece of toasted cheese will do it. There's my gauntlet. Take off whatever he's got around it, the cloth maybe, or should be a glove, but I'll prove it on a giant. Bring up the brown bills. Oh, well, Culbert, I'm the cloud. I'm the cloud. Oh, give me the word. Sweet Marshall. What is Edgar's stance throughout these little speeches of his? What's he doing? What does this mean? Oh, upside. Sweet Marshall. As though what? No, not a password. It's just words of astonishment, right? This is the king, naked, and practically naked, totally crazy. But Lear thinks it's a password, right? There's a little pass. Oh, I know that voice. Ha ha ha! Goneril with a white beard. They flattered me like a dog. Told me I had white hairs in my beard and the black ones were there. To say aye and no to everything that I said. Aye and no, too, was no good divinity when the rain came to wet me once, the wind to make me chatter. When the thunder would not peace at my bidding, there, I found them out. There, I smelt them out. Go to, they are not men of their word. They told me I was everything. I'm not ague-proof. Extreme insight from Lear at this point. You go back to his whole life as a king with a speech like this. They flattered me like a dog. Told me I had white hairs in my beard and the black ones were there. What happened to him as a young man? He tried to find an understanding for what happened over his whole life, for his great weaknesses and failures as a person. There's reason for it. Hey, you know, What did they do? What does it mean? They told me I had white hairs before I had any black hair. Yes, white hairs are wisdom. Thank God. Before I even had a beard. So you know that he was king when? He had to be 12, 11 years old, right? Because the prince wouldn't be told such stupidities. The father would be the one. Right? So we know that he had to be king before he was even capable of growing a beard. What is the consequence of telling a 10-year-old, 11-year-old boy, you are right? Anything you want. You see the point? Well, no wonder he became a willful, dominating man. To say aye and no to everything that I said. What's he referring to? They always agreed. It's so cold out. Yes, sir, really. Oh, no, maybe it's hot. Well, maybe you're right, it is hot, right? So Lear had no person against whom he could put his own opinions to get another vision of what was true and what was false. I and no was no good divinity. See the point? It was not. It wasn't true. I didn't know what was good or what was bad. When the rain came to wet me once, when? Yes. Had he ever got wet before? No. And the wind to make me chatter. When the thunder would not peace at my bidding, there I found them out. What did he find out? That he doesn't have the power of God. Right? He's not like the emperor who stood at the shore and told the tide to go back, and it did. He didn't know. Go to. They are not men of their word. They told me I was everything. Not true. I can catch the flu. So we would call aching chills and fever. He wasn't everything. The trick of that voice I do well remember. Is that not the king? Aye. Every inch the king. Oh, when I do stare. See how that subject quakes. Pardon that man's life. What was thy cause? Adultery. Oh, thou shalt not die. Die for adultery, no. The wren goes to it. Make small gilded flies that lecher in thy sight. Let copulation thrive. The Gloucester's bastard son was kinder to his father than my daughters. Got to him with awful sheets. To it luxury, pell-mell, for I lack soldiers. Meaning what? It says this is a continuation of this. We're in one of the most wonderful speeches Shakespeare ever wrote, and one of the most horrifying. This is the most misogynistic speech I've ever read. As we go on, the hatred of women is simply beyond belief. Well, but go back. I'm the king. I pardon that man. Do I have power? Sure. What did you do? Commit adultery? Far be it from me. He was a man who seldom did it, but he had the power to free people, didn't he, from the punishment of their crimes. All right. But he says, why should you die for adultery? The law says you die for it. No. Why? When what? Everything. Right? How do you stop people from adultery? Everything. Flies do it. In my sight, right? So you see them, you've all seen them yourself, right? The wrens. I'm the king. What should I be able to do if I'm the king? Well, of course. If I say you don't do it, but I can't stop those flies, right? I can't stop those wrens from doing it right in public in front of me. Why should you be any different from them? Besides, I have lawful children. Look what they did to me. Gloucester's bastard son. Is it true? He doesn't know what happened. But he says no. Besides, if I wanted to make adultery punishable by death, what could I do? I don't have any power. Adultery. Behold, yon simpering dame. And he's getting at this horrible conflict between the exterior and the interior. What do you believe in the people you see around you, right? Whose face between her forks presages snow, that minces virtue and does shake the head to hear a pleasure's name, The fichu, nor the soiled horse goes to it with a more riotous appetite. Down from the waist they are centaurs, though women all above. But to the girdle to the gods inherent, beneath is all the fiends. There's hell, there's darkness, there is the sulphurous pit burning, scalding, stench, consumption, fie. Give me an ounce of civet, good apothecary. Sweeten my imagination. There's money for thee. Oh, let me kiss that hand. Let me wipe it first. Smell of mortality. What have women become for him? This is as appalling as I didn't know what to do the first time I came up with this, teaching it to high school kids. The sexual implications of the appetites are really tough. And lucky, the funny thing was that Father David Lee from Seattle U was visiting, and he wanted to teach, so I said, you can teach. And so there's nothing like a good Roman Catholic priest to teach this speech, and I felt less inhibited since. You cannot stop something. The first half of the speech is really about power. The second half of the speech is about deception, right? A daughter ought to be loving her father. That's the rule of nature. But you can't trust them at all. If you knew what his daughters were like, would he have given them his kingdom? By no means. Look at that woman over there, he says. You hold yon simpering dame. What does simpering mean? It's just prim. Right? Oh, an evil thought never went through her mind, right? Whose face between her forks presages snow. If you looked at her face, you would think that between her legs she would be cold, right? That there would be no passion there at all. True? Right? That minces virtue. What does mince mean? Yes, she walks like this. I'm just the most untouched thing you ever saw. And does shake the head. Do you hear of pleasure's name? When someone says something that has to do with sex, what does she do? Right? All these things. And then he starts moving fast, and the emotion rises. The fichu, or the soiled horse, goes to it with a more riotous appetite. If she gets a chance, is she as bad as the worst animal? Yes. Women are centaurs. And you know what a centaur is? Human from the waist, horse from the waist down. Yes. The women all above. Beneath is the theme. Under the surface of these women. He is using an imagery which is physical, so it's waist up and waist down. But it doesn't take much reading to realize that the meaning of the play has to do with the exterior versus the interior, doesn't it? And that's the distinction. Goneril and Regan are attractive women. Regan in particular, especially if she's Diana Rigg, is attractive. But underneath their exterior is this horrible appetite, which does not have to be sex, it can be power, it can be viciousness. And he goes crazy when he thinks about it. There is hell, there's darkness, there is sulphurous pit burning, scalding, stench. And he reaches the point that's fie. He's gone so far into his imagination that he can't stand it. That the smell of the stench, the rottenness, and he turns to Gloucester, who's sitting there with his bandaged eyes, and says, give me an ounce of civet, good apothecary, meaning give me some perfume so I can't stand the odor in the air. Right? And he sniffs on that and says, here's payment for that. Let me wipe it first. Smells of mortality. O ruined piece of nature, this great world shall so wear out anon. Dost thou know me? I remember thine eyes well enough. Dost thou squint at me? Are you? Yes. Oh, no, do thy worst, blind Cupid. Why do they say that? Cupid is blind, isn't he? Yeah, love is blind. I'll not long. Read thou this challenge. Mark but the penning of it. For all thine entered sun, I could not see. Could not take this report. It is my heart breaks. Read. What? With the case of eyes, meaning with only the box in which eyes come. Oh, are you there with me? No eyes in your head, nor no money in your purse. Your eyes are in a heavy case, your purse in a light. Yet you see how this world goes. I see it feelingly. What? Art mad? A man may see how this world goes with no eyes. Look with thine ears. See how yon justice rails upon yon simple thief. This is the crux of the social meaning of his play. It's this madness. This is the heart of the soul. Lear has learned. See yon justice. There's the person on the bench, Judge so-and-so, telling the criminal, right? You criminal, we in society will protect ourselves. We'll put you where you belong. Okay? He was railing. Hearken, thine ear. Change places. Handy-dandy. Which is the justice? Which is the thief? You see the point? It's sort of like a shell game, right? Find the thief. Find the justice. Find it. How do you know a virtuous justice from a villainous thief? By the clothes they wear. And what do you know about clothes? They're lendings. They're borrowing. If you put the thief in the judge's robes and the thief's hole-filled clothes, his windowed and looped rags, you won't know the difference. You see? Thou hast seen a farmer's dog bark at a beggar? Aye, sir. And the creature run from the cur? There, thou mightest behold the great image of authority. A dog obeys in office. If a dog runs at you, it says, stay away from this property, you listen to the dog, don't you? And who was the dog in office? He was, right? He had power. He confused the office and the power of the office with the man. He thought Lear was the power. Lear wasn't the power. Lear had power because of the position he was in society, and he had an obligation to use it with an awareness that he was that forked, naked person underneath. That's the real man. And now he sees it. Thou rascal beetle, hold thy bloody hand. Okay, a policeman is whipping a whore, right? Stop it, he says. Why dost thou lash that whore? Strip thy own back, thou hardly lust to use her in that kind for which thou hast witnessed her. So here you've got authority whipping. The woman's a whore. The man takes the position of virtue and whips her for her sin. He says, in your heart, you wish you had the courage to do it, right? You're enjoying this. Now, I suspect that people who are out on the crusade for censorship, going to watch the movies on First Avenue, so they go back and say this is. I suspect that they're enjoying their job, and I don't like that. I go and enjoy it and pay for it, but then don't tell me that. You ever get that feeling a little bit? Absolutely, absolutely. This is, I think, deeply out of the Christian tradition. The first one of you who hasn't done it in your heart, pick up the rock and throw it at this prostitute, right? But the society forgets that. Lear is seeing it, so it's a deeply Christian truth, what he's saying. Be a little forgiving. Don't judge unless you're willing to be judged as well. In his madness, Lear has seen this truth. The usurer hangs the cozener, right? The rich man who makes money off lending, money off the loaner, hangs, sitting on his justice's bench, the liar, right? The cheater. Through tattered clothes, small vices do appear. Robes and fur gowns hide all. Right? Have enough wealth, you can get away. Rich people don't die in the electric chair in the United States. They don't. They don't. Only poor people end up being executed under the laws of Western civilization. Plate sin with gold, and the strong lance of justice hurtless breaks. Armed in rags, a pygmy straw was pierced. None does offend. None. There is the line. I'm coming more and more, I think that's it right there. Lear's truth. Nobody. Okay. Here's the man who at the beginning of the play, you're guilty, you're guilty, you're guilty, I do this, I do that, punish him, punish her. And now he says, I'm almost done. None. I say none. I'll able them. I will give them their freedom. I can do it. I'm the king. See? I can do it. Take that of me, my friend, who has the power to seal the accuser's lips. You can see glass eyes, and like a scurvy politician, seem to see the things thou dost not. Now, pull off my boots. harder, harder, so. Oh, matter and impertinency mixed. Does Gloucester understand? Edgar understand? Truth and madness, right? Reason in, thou wilt weep my fortune, take my eyes. I know thee well enough. My name is Gloucester. Thou must be patient. We came crying hither. Thou knowest the first time that we smell the air, we wail and cry. I will preach to thee, Mark, alack, again. When we are born, we cry, and we come to this great stage of fools. This is a good block? What's he talking about? What's a good block? No, it's not that kind. Gloucester can't get his boots off. Finally, he sticks his boots in oh, finally, right? Got a shoehorn there. It's a delicate stratagem to shoe a troop of horses with felt. I'll put it in proof. When I have stolen upon these son-in-laws, then kill, 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 kill. And in come the soldiers who he thinks are going to take him away. And that's the best we can do with Lear. When we are born, we cry that we come to this great stage of fools. Is that what yours is? Yeah, maybe it is. But maybe it's worth it. The tragedy of the play, I think, is that, boy, would he ever make a good king? No. It's way too late. Yeah, way too late. So you have to look on Act 5 yourself and see the return of Cordelia and so forth. It's worth the effort. I'll see you next year sometime, I suppose. Made it almost all the way through.
Of the year, and we have a very distinguished speaker this morning. But before I tell you about him, I want to remind you again about our luncheon next week. A week from today, the theme is buttons and bows. Our talented Norma Wills and her grammar workshop is in charge of the program. Do come and bring guests if you like, but be sure and make reservations. 11:30 Gold Room, 12:15 for the lunch and the program. We encourage you, but you don't have to, wear something in keeping with the theme, country girl, city girl, or whatever you like. But come. This morning, Professor Thomas Presley of the University of Washington is going to talk to us about Gore Vidal's book called Lincoln. Professor Presley has 3 degrees from Harvard, A.B., A.M., and Ph.D. And during the Second World War, he was in the armed services for approximately 4.5 years, including service overseas in Panama, Australia, and Italy. He was an aerial navigator and flew combat missions in B-24 bombers from Italy in 1945. He's joined the history department at the University of Washington in 1949 and has been associated with the university ever since. He says his chief interests in history have been the history of the United States in the 19th and 20th century, and his major writing is a book, Americans Interpret Their Civil War. It makes him a very good person indeed to talk to us about Lincoln. Professor Presley.
At one time, I could say I was very young when I came to the university in 1949, but I can't say that anymore. And if I said it, you wouldn't believe it now because of my appearance. It's a long time, and the Second World War was certainly a long time ago, too. I have very pleasant memories of being here. I'm not sure how many times I've been here. I think I've been here maybe 3 or 4 times over the years, and I was trying to estimate when the last time was, and none of us could remember the precise year. I found, unfortunately, and this you wouldn't know about here, none of you, I found that Sometimes now I have difficulty not only remembering the years, but remembering what decade something happened. At least I'm sure I was here in this century. I know which century it was I was here. Of course, if we live 15 years longer, then it's going to be possible to confuse what century it was. You see, I'm going to be in trouble then if I live that long. Well, I'm happy to talk to you about Vidal's novel, and I will try to stick to, incidentally, if you can't hear me back there, if you'll just hold up your hand. My voice really doesn't carry at all, so if I move far from this microphone, you won't be able to hear me, but I'll be watching you. If you just hold up your hands back there, and I'll remember to get closer to the microphone. I began my comments about Gore Vidal's Lincoln with an expression of surprise. When I first heard several years ago that read in the paper that Gore Vidal was going to write a television segment about Abraham Lincoln and perhaps a novel, my assumption was that this was going to be exceedingly critical of Lincoln, very harsh toward Lincoln. Well, why did I think that? My picture, what little I know of Vidal, and I don't know much about him, I've never met him or anything, but my picture from articles about him and from some of his writings, I certainly don't know all of his writings, he's very prolific as a writer, as you know, but the ones that I had read or even looked at, it seemed to me Vidal was personally was quite a different person from Lincoln and had what I would think different heroes. In many ways, I think maybe one of Vidal's most successful books is his novel about Aaron Burr. It came out in the 1970s. I'm sorry, I don't remember precisely what year. Vidal was very, very sympathetic to Aaron Burr, and this is what I would expect. Like, so sympathetic that I think my reaction, I didn't read every word in it, but my reaction reading it is that Burr himself couldn't have written a more appealing autobiography if he had written it himself. Now, Aaron Burr seems to me quite unlike Abraham Lincoln. Aaron Burr, it seems to me, and I think also Vidal, although I must say that all I know about Vidal is what I've read in some interviews about him, and that may be fallacious. My picture of both Aaron Burr and Vidal is that they are people with very, very strong egos who are convinced they are right. And certainly in the case of Burr, I'm speaking not about Vidal, but Burr, I think, my picture of Burr is that his ego really didn't know any bounds at all. He was not really prepared to restrain his ego, and his whole life, it seems to me, is marked by a series of episodes in which Burr sort of takes on the whole world at one time and another, you see, in one cause or another. And Burr is always convinced he's right, and convinced that everybody else is mistaken. And actually, my own view, historians do not agree, the most controversial thing, I think, in Burr's career from the national standpoint is in 1806, 1805, 6, and 7, Burr planned something in the West. Burr had been vice president under Jefferson, 1801 to 1805. It was during that period that Burr shot Alexander Hamilton. It was a duel. I'm not trying to make you score any points on Burr there. I mean, it was a duel, and each one shot at the other, and it turned out that Burr killed Hamilton. Jefferson did not pick Burr to be his vice president the second term. So while Jefferson was president from 1805 to 1809, Burr was no longer vice president. Burr goes out west at that time and raises troops in the West. He raises a force of 150 or so persons, and they rendezvous on an island in the Ohio River called Blennerhassett's Island. And they have arms and ammunition, and they depart from Blennerhassett's Island, going down the Ohio River, and presumably then going down the Mississippi River. The big question, both then and now, about Aaron Burr is what did he have in mind, you see. Burr tended to maintain, Burr was arrested, Jefferson was president, and there were reports, Jefferson received reports, that Burr was going to try to set up a separate government in the West, in opposition to the United States government. Burr was arrested and was tried for treason, charges of treason against the United States. The trial was held 1806, 1807. Chief Justice Marshall presided the trial, and Burr was found innocent by Chief Justice Marshall, holding strictly to the constitutional definition of treason. The Constitution is very strict in defining treason. Treason shall consist only in actions against the United States government, giving aid and comfort to their enemy. And to convict for treason in the Constitution, you have to have two witnesses to the act. Words are not treason, you see, under the Constitution. Words themselves are not treason. It has to be an action against, in other words, you have to take up arms or take some action against the United States government. Not only that, you have to have two witnesses to this action. People who wrote the Constitution defined treason quite narrowly and quite literally. Presumably the reason they did that is because they had been in danger if they had lost the revolution. The people who wrote the Constitution were the people who fought the war for independence, and if they had lost, they would have been liable to treason charges. There were three individuals who testified in open court under oath at Burr's trial, and I don't know, whether they were accurate or not, that Burr had told them, they had heard him say at one time or another, that he did plan to take over the United States government. That with 500 troops, he could go to Washington, D.C. and take over the government. Now, I'm not myself making that charge, I don't know, you see, but there were three people who testified under oath something to that effect. My point is that I think Burr, really, his ego was unrestrained. He was so confident in his own abilities. He liked power so much, and he so sought it. Vidal, I think, is quite sympathetic to that. Vidal likes power very much, I think. You see, and I'll speak a little more about that in a moment. But I was not surprised, my point is, at least with my view of Vidal, I was not surprised he was very sympathetic to Aaron Burr. But this is the reason I was so, in a way, apprehensive. I guess that's not probably the word to use. I just assumed that his biography of Lincoln, if he wrote one, would be exceedingly critical. Because Lincoln, as I will suggest as we go along, Lincoln does not seem to me like Aaron Burr. Right off, I don't see many similarities between Abraham Lincoln and Aaron Burr. So I was surprised. What I had expected, I thought of a phrase by Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde once said, biography lends to death a new terror. That is, after you die, someone would write your biography, and who knew what they would say. A similar kind of sentiment, kind of classic comment that a number of you have probably heard. A critic named Edwin Wilson, who's now dead, distinguished United States literary critic and novelist himself. He was talking once about biographies of Abraham Lincoln, and he mentioned biography by Carl Sandburg. I don't know how many of you have read Sandburg's Lincoln. It's a huge, long thing. Thank you. It's Carl Sandburg's Lincoln. It's a huge, long work, 6 volumes, and it's exceedingly sympathetic to Lincoln. In fact, it's hard for me to believe that Carl Sandburg is talking about any recognizable person. I mean, he's talking about great forces, the great wind that sweeps across the prairie, and it's this man from the prairie, and so on and so on. Edwin Wilson's statement was, he said, there are moments when one is tempted to feel that the cruelest thing that has happened to Lincoln since he was shot by John Wilkes Booth was to fall into the hands of Carl Sandburg. because Wilson felt that this did Lincoln a great disservice, that you couldn't believe the person that Carl Sandburg created. Well, I thought of those sayings, you see, and I thought, well, yes, that would be, it's going to be crueler still if Lincoln falls into the hands of Gore Vidal. You see, that'll be worse still. But it's not that way. Okay, I was surprised. Now, what is Vidal's perspective? See, Vidal's perspective in that novel is quite sympathetic, by and large, to Abraham Lincoln. It's quite sympathetic. If you take the cases where Lincoln disagreed with people at the time, so the classic cases of conflicts with Lincoln and other people, and who had more right on their side than the other and so on, seems to me that Vidal, without exception, comes down on the side of Lincoln. There's, for example, William H. Seward became Secretary of State. Seward was a prominent political leader, more prominent in the Republican Party than Abraham Lincoln. Everyone, I think, almost without exception, in 1860, assumed that Seward would get the Republican nomination. And Seward himself assumed that, and he thought it was his due. So, Seward didn't get the Republican nomination. Instead, it was Lincoln. I think Seward distrusted Lincoln's abilities, and Seward thought he was much shrewder, much more experienced than Lincoln, and so on. And Seward, early in the administration, in fact, the first few weeks in the administration of Lincoln, this is March 1861, Seward handed Lincoln a paper in which Seward, in effect, said that the administration was floundering around, and clearly someone would have to take over and get things organized in the administration. And clearly the implication in the letter was that the man for the job was William H. Seward, you see, and the experienced statesman should take things over. And in the course of the letter, Seward suggested that probably the best solution right now was to try to bring North and South together against France. France had, Emperor Napoleon III had some kind of designs in Mexico. It wasn't crystal clear just what they were. It became clear because Napoleon III set up a puppet emperor in Mexico, Maximilian. But it wasn't clear in 1861, at least in March of 1861, precisely what Napoleon III had in mind. So what Seward proposed, in effect, was that North and South joined together against France. And that would bring the country back together and they could resolve their difficulties. But the major thrust of the letter was that Seward would be the person to direct policy. Vidal describes that, and he describes the showdown between Lincoln and Seward when Lincoln takes the letter out of his pocket and looks at it. Lincoln, obviously, he'd seen it before, but this with Seward. And he goes through it, and he said, he says to Seward, in Vidal's version, in effect, you're suggesting that the administration cannot take care of itself and somebody needs to take over. And Lincoln made clear that he did not think that was the case at all, and that he would really forget Seward's letter, and he urged that Seward forget it, that it would be best all the way around if Seward forgets all about that letter. And he said it in such a way that Seward realized he had misjudged his person, that Lincoln was perfectly able to take care of things, including Seward. And a whole series of other incidents. And Seward ultimately becomes an ardent admirer and supporter of Lincoln's. Well, the way Vidal describes that, it seems to be no matter how ardent a pro-Lincoln person one is, would be quite satisfactory from that standpoint, sympathetic. Another example of this sort of thing. A conflict between Lincoln and another of his cabinet members, a man named Chase, who very much wanted to be president, Samuel Chase from Ohio. And Chase, there were a whole series of incidents, and I won't try to go into all of them here, in which Chase and his allies in Congress. December of 1862, when the military situation looked quite bad for the Union, a group of congressmen waited on the president and in effect were trying to force Lincoln to remove Seward from his cabinet. Chase and Seward were rivals. They were both in Lincoln's cabinet. And Chase supporters were seeking to force Lincoln to remove Seward from the cabinet. And clearly what that would mean would be that Chase would become the dominant figure in the cabinet. And Lincoln meets with them over a couple of days and so arranges it that the whole cabinet is present at one of the meetings, and he invites people in the cabinet who have criticism of him with the congressman there, just to express what their criticism is. Well, Chase, the pressure was on Chase then to sort of stick with the rest of the cabinet, to not come out, and the rest of the cabinet was saying they supported what Lincoln was doing. And it put Chase in a terribly awkward situation. Either he could come out against the rest of the cabinet and say, no, I don't support what he's doing, or else before the congressman to whom Chase had criticized Lincoln, he could say, well, no, I support Lincoln. And so Chase, clearly Lincoln outmaneuvered Chase, if you wish to express in terms of personal relations or political terms. He outmaneuvered Chase. And finally, Seward had already offered his resignation, and Lincoln did not accept it. And finally, Chase felt enough pressure from the other members of the cabinet in this meeting that he offered his own resignation. And then Lincoln jumped for it. The report is usually given that people who were there, Lincoln snatched it right out of his hand, and then he did not accept either one of them. He had a resignation from each one of them. See, the two strong people in the cabinet, he didn't accept either one. He kept them in his cabinet. Okay, the way Vidal, pardon me. The way Vidal describes that experience is very sympathetic to Lincoln, you see. That once again, Lincoln outmaneuvered Chase, that he was superior in terms of human relations, in terms of the exercise of power. Lincoln, having these strong people in his cabinet, presidents seem to me they're faced with a choice. And any president's faced with this choice. I think it goes with the territory, it goes with the job. You've got strong leaders in your party. Okay. Certain type of president does not put those strong leaders in his cabinet. He doesn't want to have those strong leaders around him, giving him grief, you see, as he sees it. He likes to be surrounded by people who are not going to give him any trouble. Other types of presidents, and I think Lincoln is the striking example here, takes all the strong people, most of whom want to be president and wanted to be president instead of him, and puts them all in his cabinet. And one account, when Lincoln's wife mentioned this to him, and do you think it's wise to put all of these people in your cabinet? And he says, yes, I want them right there where I can keep my eye on them. Now, what this suggests to me is a great inner security on Lincoln's part, you see. It may be he felt this was the only way to do. He was a dark horse candidate, as a term is used in American politics, in that he was not the favorite. Everyone assumed Seward would get it. And I think probably Lincoln, if you had taken poll what people say before the Republican convention, Lincoln would have been down maybe fourth, something like that, on what people would have predicted. He was not totally unknown, nothing like that at all, but among the top leaders in the Republican Party, they would have ranked him maybe third or fourth, somewhere down there. It may be that Lincoln felt that that was the only possible strategy for a person in a place like himself, that he had not been recognized as the top leader of the Republican Party before. Therefore, he needed to have in his cabinet the person, Seward, and another person, Chase, and so on, who had been represented as top leaders. Vidal, in describing all of this, he describes all of it sympathetically, you see. And so it turns out that I'm in a sense explaining to you my surprise, you see, all this. None of this is what I would have predicted when I first read the announcement about Vidal. Well, then how does one explain this? You can say, well, you're not any good at predicting. You don't know anything about Gore Vidal, clearly, or whatever. And that may be the case. That's certainly a possibility. I wondered myself, how could I have been so mistaken about Gore Vidal, my picture of Gore Vidal? Well, when this book was published, the Lincoln book, there were a lot of interviews with Gore Vidal. And if you followed, you probably read some of them. And there's a go-along one, there was a long one in Newsweek that someone showed me. And in this interview, Vidal is quoted as saying that Lincoln knew how to use power just the way I do. And that, when I read that, I began to think, well, that may explain it, you see. That Vidal is putting Lincoln in Vidal's class as people who know how to exercise power. And therefore, Vidal is praising Lincoln because Vidal considers Lincoln in his league. You see, Lincoln is like me, us people who know how to use power, you see, and use power effectively. I don't know whether that's the explanation. It seems to me the likeliest explanation, other than saying that I was just totally mistaken, and in my estimate of Vidal ahead of time. And one never likes to think that, even if it's true, and I will be presenting some more evidence that makes me think it's not true, but I hold it out as a possibility. It may not be complicated at all. It may just be as simple. You don't understand Gore Vidal, therefore, that you shouldn't have been surprised. Well, another question that I want to raise with you here, I'm keeping my eye on the clock, and I would like to allow some time for questions at the end if you have any questions. It's always possible when you're talking about Lincoln, I think talking about Gore Vidal, you can talk for several hours. There's no lack of material, but I do plan to stop a little before the time I'm supposed to stop and see if you have any questions. If you don't have any questions and you want to fill up the rest of the time, there's other things to be said about Lincoln Vidal. The question now I want to turn to, is Vidal's account accurate? Simply that's a question that comes to the mind of many people. I've suggested it's sympathetic to Lincoln. Okay, another question now, is it accurate? Vidal himself addresses that question. He has what he calls an afterword at the end of the book, after the book finishes, afterword, which is 3 paragraphs. It's not a full page. He begins, how much of Lincoln, that is Lincoln underlined, this book, is generally thought to be true? How much made up? This is an urgent question for any reader and deserves as straight an answer as the writer can give. And then he gives his answer. I have introduced fewer inventive figures, as he invented himself, in Lincoln than I did in Burr or than I did in 1876, another Vidal novel. All of the principal characters really existed, and they said and did pretty much what I have them saying and doing, with the exception of the Surratts and David Harold, who really lived and worked at Thompson's. As David's life, David Harold, one of the conspirators in the assassination of Lincoln, as David's life is largely unknown until Booth's conspiracy, I have invented a low life for him. Then he goes on to point out, if you'll let me read one other sentence or so, readers of the other novels in this chronicle will recognize, and he mentions the names of some fictional characters that he has had in other novels, and then he continues them here. Charlie Schuyler, who was in Burr in 1876, Emma, who was in 1876, and the vile, ubiquitous William de la Touche Clancy. These are all fictional, he says. As for Lincoln and the other historical figures, I have reconstructed them from letters, journals, newspapers, diaries, etc. Occasionally, I have done some moving around. Okay, I'll stop there. Now, to a professional historian, that's just bad in a way. He says, it's basically, what I've said there is basically based on the diaries and letters at the time, but I have some fictional characters, and I've moved some of the real characters, I've moved them around a little, you see. See, that gives him leeway to have done anything, you see. And so you really, I'd say from Vidal's statement, you don't have, what the sense I get is that, yes, I tried to make this accurate, but also I had other things in view. I wanted to bring in these characters that I'd used in other stories, these fictional characters, and occasionally I would move some of the real characters around in a way that did not happen in actual life. When I would contrast myself, I'd contrast Vidal's words with the words of people at the time and with Lincoln's own words. Let me give you a few examples of how people at the time describe Lincoln. Not all the descriptions at the time, certainly, are sympathetic to Lincoln. Here's one of the early ones by a man who was, I think, basically a very nice person, a Philadelphia lawyer named Fisher. He was a wealthy Philadelphia lawyer, and he describes in his diary, he's just hearing about Abraham Lincoln. Who in the world is the person he's hearing about? This is May 1861, shortly before, May 1860, shortly before the Republican Convention. He told me just knew, well, it's right after, it's right after the nomination. He says, I met Mr. Ryan on the road. He told me news that had just come to town, that the Republican Party had nominated a Mr. Lincoln for president. I never heard of him before. Now, this is a well-read Philadelphia lawyer. The convention was in Chicago. The word has just reached Philadelphia, and he says, I never heard of him before. Then he goes on a couple of days later. He's now read about Lincoln in the newspapers. Lincoln is a Western screamer, represents Western coarseness and violence. The papers say he was fond of horse racing, foot racing, etc., and that when he spoke at Republican meetings in New York, the tickets were sold for his benefit. Such is democracy. See, Fisher is an upper-class Whig, and he's very leery about the mass of people having the vote, you see. That was still new in the United States, as the mass of adult white males having the vote. And Fisher is very leery about that, and to him, his first reaction is that that's what Abraham Lincoln represents. You see, this Western coarseness and crudeness, people who've never been to Philadelphia and don't know what a nice Philadelphia home looks like, and so on. So I'm not trying to suggest that all the accounts at the time are favorable. To me, they have a little different ring from Vidal's account. Let me read you one here. This is from the novelist Nathaniel Hawthorne, July 1862. He visits the White House. By and by, he's describing, he's in the White House and he's going to see Lincoln. By and by, there was a little stir on the staircase and in the passageway, and in lounged a tall, loose-jointed figure of an exaggerated Yankee port and demeanor, whom, as being about the homeliest man I ever saw, yet by no means repulsive or disagreeable, it was impossible not to recognize as a lady. He had never seen Lincoln before. He says you can't help but recognize him. There's no describing his lengthy awkwardness, nor the uncouthness of his movement. And yet it seemed as if I had been in the habit of seeing him daily and had shaken hands with him 1,000 times in some village street. If put to guess his calling and livelihood, I should have taken him for a country schoolmaster. Somewhat pushy. Then he goes on and makes a final statement. A great deal of native sense, there seems here, he's describing Lincoln. No bookish cultivation, no refinement, honest at heart, and thoroughly so, and yet in some sort sly, at least endowed with a sort of tact and wisdom that are akin to craft, and would impel him, I think, to take an antagonist in the flank rather than to make a bull run at him right in front. But on the whole, I like this sallow, queer, his sallow, queer, sagacious visage, with the homely human sympathies that warmed him. And for my small share in the matter, would as lief have Uncle Haiti for a ruler as any man whom it would have been practicable to put in his place. We retired out of his presence in high good humor. I'm skipping over part of it here, only regretting that we could not have seen the president sit down and fold up his legs, which is said to be a most extraordinary spectacle. That's the way the thing of Hawthorne saw it. Now, when Hawthorne says, it seems to be a tremendous compliment to anyone, sort of the ultimate compliment, when you say you'd just as soon have that person be a ruler over you as anyone whom you could imagine in that office. My point is that I'm not sure the Vidal Lincoln is that kind of Lincoln. Vidal is sympathetic to Lincoln, but what Vidal emphasizes, seems to me, is Lincoln's cunning and Lincoln's great desire for power, you see. And that seems to me is not what Hawthorne saw. Hawthorne saw someone, seems to me, who was not greatly desirous of power necessarily. Cunning, yes, as Hawthorne puts it, in the sense that if he has to fight an opponent, if he can, he's going to go around and attack him from the side rather than attack him head on. But to Hawthorne, obviously, that's just common sense, and kind of shrewdness, and that's what you would want in someone who was your ruler. There are other, if there were time, I would read you other things by people at the time, but it seems to me many of them come out with that very same picture. Frederick Douglass, the black leader, the most prominent black leader at the time. His picture, if I had time, I would like to read it to you, because he says that Lincoln made him feel more at home and made him feel more of an equal than anyone else. Now, Frederick Douglass disagreed with Lincoln, you see, on a number of points. In 1864, Frederick Douglass joined a movement to try to replace Lincoln as the Republican nominee. So Frederick Douglass is not someone who's in Lincoln's hip pocket, as they say, you see, at all. But that's Frederick Douglass's testimony. Frederick Douglass is very sensitive to whites. He feels he's been slighted by whites and mistreated by whites, and he was himself a slave, you see. Frederick Douglass is beaten, and so on. But his tribute's impressive. But I want to close my comments here by reading from Lincoln's own words. And there are many different words I would like to read from, but the only one I'll have time here is Lincoln's second inaugural, March 1865. It seems to me a really remarkable document. It's short. You can print the whole thing on one page, not quite as short as the Gettysburg Address, but short. And in it, Lincoln is sort of speculating about the war. The war is not going to end until April of 1865. This is March 4th, 1865. And Lincoln is contrasting it with 4 years before, when he was first inaugurated in March of 1861. And he becomes philosophical, as Lincoln frequently did, see, about the smallest things. He sort of is detached philosophical. And he gets to, when he's into the speech, he said, both sides read the same Bible. The war was still in doubt. Lincoln, I think there was, in effect, no doubt that the North was going to win by March 1865, but the issue was not settled. The war was still on. Grant did not surrender until April. Lincoln says, both sides read the same Bible, both North and South, and both pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. And Lincoln sort of standing back. Now that's a remarkable thing, says Lincoln, by implication. See. Both sides in this war read the same Bible, both pray to the same God. They both pray for victory for themselves against the other. And Lincoln's sort of throwing that thought out, for you to turn around your mind. Yes, that is. That's an interesting thing. Here, the next sentence, you see Lincoln the Northerner. He's speaking to a Northern audience. He says, he himself is a Northerner. It may seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces. And clearly that would be the reaction of the Northerners. That it's absurd for Southerners, white Southerners, to pray to God when they own slaves, you see. How could they possibly think God would listen to them? And that would be the northern view. But Lincoln, you see, disassociates himself from that. He says, but let us judge not, that we be not judged, you see. He's standing apart from that. It's not us to say who is right and who is wrong in this contest. And then he goes on with the sentence. He says, the Almighty has his own purposes. Now, what I understand Lincoln to say there is that individuals should not claim that God is on their side. How does one know that God is on one's side, you see? Southerners think God is on their side. Northerners think God is on their side. Lincoln raises the possibility that God may not be on either side, you see. The Almighty has his own purposes. And see, me, that's a remarkable detachment. I personally think it would be good for everybody, both in their personal life and in their national life and everything else. Not to assume right away that God's on their side, you see. Contrast that with the spirit of Thoreau. Thoreau, when he's praising John Brown, Thoreau says, don't talk to me about majorities, whether the majority supports John Brown. One with God is a majority. That's the Thoreau position, because Thoreau is convinced he's absolutely right, you see, and he's on God's side, so that means a majority right away. See, Lincoln is suggesting that you can't know what God thinks, and you should not claim that God is on your side, you see. Personally, I think that's exceedingly useful to keep in mind, you see. Now, it's that side of Lincoln, it seems to me, does not come out. I'm not going to suggest to you that Gore Vidal would not agree with that statement, or would agree. But Vidal quotes the second inaugural, but he doesn't really make much of it. He's concerned with how Seward is reacting. That's the main thrust of his description of the second inaugural. And finally, Seward has tears in his eyes at the end, and that's understandable. But that's the reason that Vidal's picture seems to me was quite sympathetic to Lincoln. It does talk about the exercise of power, which is a part of Lincoln. But what it doesn't get, it seems to me, in Vidal's picture, is the kind of restraint that Lincoln always put on himself. See, somebody who says in a fight, you see, and who's really concerned that one side wins. See, if you don't care who wins, then everybody can be detached. There's nothing easier. You know, and if you see a fight and you're not involved in it, you can relax. Well, goodness, thank goodness, I'm not involved in that one, you see. Go it husband, go it bear, you see. I'm not really involved in that fight at all. So it's easy to be detached there. But in a fight where you think there are real vital principles at stake, you see. And, without any trouble, we could all name 10 today in Seattle, in the country as a whole, in the world as a whole, you see. But in that sort of situation where you feel very strongly, as Lincoln did, and where you've been fighting for 4 years, then to stand back and say, we can't know whose side God is on, that to me is not the picture of a power-mad person, you see. That's a person whose ego is under great control, it seems to me, unlike Aaron Burr. And that's what doesn't come through with it all. Now, one final comment. My feeling would be that historical novels are perfectly good, and if people like historical novels, splendid. I'd say read them. I would read them, however, as novels. I would not read them, is this accurate or not? If one wants to know what's accurate, then I would read biographies, you see, or works of history. I'm not suggesting that professional historians have a corner on the market, you see, of truth or whatever, but because clearly they don't. I speak from first-hand experience there. What professional historians do, however, in a biography or a history is they tell you where they got the material and on what they're basing the statements, you see. The footnotes, the bibliography, and so on. So you can check what they say, and you may disagree with their interpretation. Fine. They've given you the evidence, you see, so that you can go and check it yourself if you disagree with it. That's not what historical novelists do. Now, my point is not that history, works of history are the truth, and historical novels are not the truth. That would not be my point. It's different kinds of truth, you see. I assume that most novelists, I'm quite prepared to believe that what they write anytime they think is the truth. It's a true view of the world. It's a true view of human experience, you see, that they are presenting. But it's a different kind of truth. The novelist is not saying, here are the sources from which I operated, that's the evidence. The novelist is appealing to your feeling to convince you that it's the truth, you see, and that you will say, yes, yes, I've seen people just like that, you see, and that that's the evidence right there. So I wouldn't say that one's true and the other's false, different kinds of truth. Now, I'm sorry, I'll stop right there, okay? Thank you very much. I don't know whether there's any time for questions now. There are some. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Yes. Gore Vidal, if I had to try to sum that up, it's complicated. I would say Vidal pictures Lincoln as a person who knew how to exercise power, did exercise power, but there's a lot of other things about Lincoln that Vidal pictures. Vidal seems, so far as I can tell, again, it's hard to read a novel, but so far as I can tell, Vidal seems to feel that Lincoln foresaw early in his life that he was going to be a dictator, that he, Lincoln, was going to be a dictator, that he was going to overthrow the Union set up by George Washington and create a new Union and supplant George Washington. Now, the evidence for that, Vidal doesn't talk about the evidence, but historians debated a good bit. It's a speech Lincoln gave back in 1838, and I just don't myself see how one can possibly read that speech that way. Lincoln predicted that one problem in society were that strong men, that dictators arose, you see, in society. But to say that Lincoln was predicting that he himself would be a dictator, you see. So Vidal, so far as I can tell, seems to hold that view and feel that Lincoln then had a sense of guilt about this, and that Lincoln sort of hoped for, wished for his own assassination to resolve that guilt, you see. Now again, to me, that's, I don't really quite see that. It is certainly Lincoln's dream, especially when he had about 2 weeks before his assassination, which he dreamed of the death of the president. It's really striking. And he reported to people the next day. And he later, he said, maybe I shouldn't have even told you that, because his wife was present, a man named Ward Lamont, who was his bodyguard, was present. So we have several accounts of Lincoln telling about his dream. It started, they were asking him, I think Ward Lamont was asking how he slept the night before. Said, you look pale as if you didn't rest well, or something like that. And Lincoln said, well, no, I didn't sleep well. So I went to bed quite late. I was trying to get the latest news about Grant's army. And immediately I had this dream. Lincoln describes this dream, you see. I don't think myself, though, that that's Lincoln's inviting his own assassination, you see. Seems to me that that's far removed. But Vidal, I think, pictures him as a kind of, yes, tragic figure, I suppose, in that sense. Well, I don't think so. No, Vidal thinks that comes naturally, you see. In that interview with Vidal, he's quoted as saying, this one that was in Newsweek, that unfortunately I've never been president by himself, you see. Well, now, a person, it's in quotation marks. It's possible that the interviewer, you see, misunderstood him or whatever, and so on. But, a person who will make that kind of statement, unless it's absolutely clear that the person is joking, you see, right away I begin to wonder just a little about that person, you see. I'm not trying to make a case against Vidal as a person, because I don't know anything about him. But I think he thinks that's all quite natural, you see, for people to want power, and especially people who are skilled in exercising power, as he and Lincoln are. Yes.
From your reading and from the Vidal book, and your own opinion, what did you feel to be the reaction to Lincoln by the bulk of the people at that time?
The question is, what would be the reaction of the bulk of the people? Well, I think the people in the North, by the end of the war, by and large, were quite sympathetic. I mean, Lincoln was a president, and presidents have their ups and downs in terms of public reaction to them. And there was a fairly strong movement to remove Lincoln, as inelegant phrase now, dump Lincoln, from the Republican Party ticket in 1864. These were by and large people who thought that Lincoln would not be sympathetic enough to blacks. They were by and large people who had been abolitionists and who were distrustful. But I think the outcome of the war, I think in democratic societies, in time of war, the connection between military events and political opinion is very close. When you're winning battles, you are popular. When you are losing battles, you are unpopular. It's similar to economic events. See, we tend to hold the president personally responsible. Now, probably we do that because when times seem good, presidents take credit for good times economically. When times are hard, when there's a depression, the public tends to hold the president personally responsible. So I think the public at the end of the war, the public in the North, was quite sympathetic to Lincoln. Yes, quite sympathetic. Yes?
Knowing about Vidal's feelings about women, how much time did he give to Lincoln's women in the book?
He, I would say, is probably a little more harsh on Mrs. Lincoln than some historians. It's hard to say. I think the best brief picture now of Mrs. Lincoln by a woman historian, sort of balance all other accounts, is by a lady named Randall, Ruth Painter Randall. It was a book published back in the 1950s. And there's a volume called Notable American Women. It's a 3-volume set published in, I believe, 1970, 1971, to partly to make up for the fact that women were not prominent, as prominent as someone who was black in the Dictionary of National Biography, the sort of standard Dictionary of American Biography. In this 3-volume set, I checked just out of curiosity, and Mrs. Randall wrote the 3-page description of Mrs. Lincoln there, and I think that's probably the most sympathetic summary. In effect, it is that Mrs. Lincoln was a stepchild, literally. Her mother died when she was 6.5 years old, that she was subject to migraine headaches, that when she got to Washington, D.C., this put a lot of added pressure, that she liked nice clothing, she liked to have dinners and so on in the White House just the way she liked them. And she felt that people were scornful of her because she was a Westerner, you see. And therefore, whether they were scornful or not, she felt they were. And I picture that there was an inner insecurity, if I may use Kirkstone psychoanalysis. And then Mrs. Lincoln became just terribly jealous of any other woman with respect to Lincoln. As far as I can tell, and one never knows about these things, but so far as I can tell, there was not any grounds for that. Lincoln simply had too much else on his mind, or what his other inclination might have been, I don't know. But she was just insanely jealous, I would say. I think you could use that word. And one of the worst scenes of all, it's near the end of the war. They're out riding, Grant is near the end. He invited Lincoln down to Virginia, and Lincoln and Mrs. Lincoln and others go. And this is before the final push on Lee, which ended at Appomattox. And Mrs. Lincoln rode on ahead on horseback. Mrs. Lincoln and Mrs. Grant and some other women are coming in a vehicle. It was really an ambulance, but that was the best vehicle they had, so the quarter of a road and very rough. And when they get there, Lincoln has already been reviewing the troops. And the wife of the commander of the regiment, who I think was a colonel, was riding with Lincoln and her husband. The three of them were riding together, reviewing the troops. Mrs. Grant saw this as they approached. There was not good feeling between Mrs. Grant and Mrs. Lincoln. Mrs. Grant saw that, and the officer with them saw it, and neither one of them apparently realized what effect this would have. And so by the time Mrs. Lincoln gets out of the ambulance, she's already aware of what's happening, and she is very unhappy about it. And she goes up to this woman on the horse, the colonel's wife, who was a good bit younger. The colonel was younger than Lincoln, the woman was younger than Mrs. Lincoln. And Vidal's description of that is graphic, you see. I'm not sure Mrs. Lincoln, he says, you allow me to use Vidal's language, you whore, you slut, you see, in the whole series of Mrs. Lincoln. And certainly there were many witnesses around, and it's clear the woman burst into tears, the colonel's wife burst into tears. And then Mrs. Lincoln turned on Mrs. Grant and said, well, I'm sure your husband staged all this. I know you and your husband want to get in the White House, and we're not going to let you in, you see. And Lincoln, all this time, saying, mother, you know, let's forget it, and so on. And one officer, the colonel describing it there, left his account, said that it was the most embarrassing scene he was ever in anywhere, in his personal life, you know, ever. Well, what Mrs. Randall says, you know, that occasionally these pressures on Mrs. Lincoln became too great, and she did do things that seemed as terrible. But Vidal, I would say, sort of rebels in that, would be my impression. Yes?
Olaf said in one of his books that the fictional biography is a low form of the novel of crime. Do you agree with that?
Well, I would just try to keep the two separate. See, as I was saying, I would not say one's true. Works of history and historical novels. I can actually praise one work by a novelist, by a poet, actually. I think still one of the best one-volume discussions of the Civil War is a book that came out in the 1920s, won the Pulitzer Prize, Stephen Vincent Benet, John Brown's Body. It's a book-length poem. It's an eloquent thing. And I think there, a poet could do things that most historians can't do. You see, he can capture nuances of feeling, and he can express it, you know, in striking language, and so on and so on. I just say there's two different kinds of truth. You know. Vidal, I think, is quite proud of it. You know, the next page after that afterword is a page describing Vidal. Well, you and I know that Vidal, if he didn't write that himself, certainly there's not anything in there that Vidal didn't want in there. I mean, if he didn't write it, he looked over the editor's shoulder. And it ends with a long quotation from an Italian writer in an Italian journal. It's translated into English. But Vidal has lived most of his life in Italy. He's had several homes. He always had one in Italy, and he's had, I think, 2 different homes in the United States. And it closes praising Vidal for having, being the pioneer in developing a, let me see if I can get the phrase here. I consider Vidal, this person, the Italian critic being quoted, to be a master of that new form which is taking shape in world literature and which we may call the hyper-novel, or the novel elevated to the square or to the cube. My picture is that that's Vidal's picture of himself. And I'm not, you know, that's fine.